Sorry, not that, Rebecca. I was signaling to Marlo. Okay. Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, welcome to the Hell's Canyon Institute project presentation. Let us begin today with a land acknowledgement. In our pursuit of learning, we gather today, as we have all semester, on the traditional lands of the Nimipu or Nez Perce people. These lands are sacred. Through acknowledgement of this land, we seek to recognize, honor, and express gratitude to the Nimipu. We are especially thankful to Nez Perce Elder Alan Pinkham, to Stacia Morfin, Sierra Green, and Vivian Henry for guiding us and helping us learn more about this land and the Nez Perce people this semester. This year's Hell's Canyon Institute was led by professors from natural sciences, social sciences, and the humanities, in addition to many collaborators from the community and the region. These students were team taught by Dr. Liz Martin, Dr. Kylie Brightsman, Dr. Marlo Daly Galliano, and myself. In the field experience, which we just got back from on Sunday, they learned from many other wonderful presenters and professors, including Jenny Light, Keegan Schmidt, Tirajeh Islami, Jeanette Garabetzold, and scientists working with the tribe, Steve and Connie Evans, Patricia Keith, and more. The list goes on and on. It has been a very full and enriching semester. The presentations you see are very ambitious, and some represent ongoing work that they hope will be continued projects for themselves, as well as continued projects for future iterations of this class. So we will begin with 4 presentations this morning, and then we'll take a Q&A session and a short break before we do our last 4 presentations, and we'll do the same thing, Q&A and dismiss. So to begin, we will have Rayana and Rebecca Buttenhoff doing their presentation for an interactive Hell's Canyon tour guide.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rayanna Buttenhoff.
And I'm Rebecca Buttenhoff.
And this is our Hell's Canyon Institute project.
Whether it is related to dam construction or more recently the removal of dams, land and wildlife preservation and protection, historical and archaeological value and ethics, or jet boat and raptor use, Hell's Canyon has been and still is a place of controversy. The fighting and battling between all these various stakeholders for what they want or don't want to happen regarding Hell's Canyon is dependent on their values and ethics that they hold. However, people are less likely to value and care about a place that they don't know about and have never experienced before. When you read about a place, you know about it, but have never seen or experienced it. When you see pictures and drawings of a place, you can now connect a visual to the words previously read. When you see videos of a place, you now have the ability to virtually move through a place and you've previously read about and seen. And when you hear people share oral stories and personal stories about a place, you hear, see, and feel the emotional and personal connection to that place. A deeper connection to a place is developed when you are able to experience it through multiple mediums. For those who can't physically visit the canyon, these mediums, the oral, visual, and written, are all they have to develop that connection to and value of that place. We chose to do this project because our grandpa, Art Siemens, was a master at using all of these mediums to not only develop his own value and love for Hell's Canyon, but instill that same value and love within others. Our grandpa worked in Hell's Canyon from 1972 to 2014. first for the Forest Service and then for Snake River Adventures. When he passed away, Rihanna and I lost a connection to Hell's Canyon. Before this class, it had been 10 years since our last visit. So for our project, with the hopes of gaining that connection back, we decided to research how does portraying Hell's Canyon through different mediums shape one's values and ethics of that place. We thought creating an interactive Hell's Canyon historical guide was a great way to do this.
Throughout Hell's Canyon, there are numerous historically rich locations. Unfortunately, it is a challenge to adequately portray all these locations without decades of research, because there are always new discoveries to be made and new perspectives to enlighten your experience of Hell's Canyon. That being said, we decided to begin this ongoing historical guide with 5 locations presented in the same order someone would visit them traveling upriver: Cache Creek, Eureka Bar, Doug Bar, Chinese Massacre Cove, and Kirkwood Ranch. We chose these locations not only because we were able to visit them in our time in the field, but also because each site encompasses the presence of different individuals who have had the honor to call Hell's Canyon home. To illustrate the historical presence of ranchers and homesteaders, the Nez Perce, white European miners, and Chinese miners at these historical sites, we will be incorporating written history, photographs, drawings, scenic videos, oral interviews, and stories. While collecting data for the written history portion of our interactive tour guide, we referenced 4 main literary sources, which can be seen in the picture on the top left-hand corner. In addition to these 4 sources, we also utilized the U.S. Forest Service website, Home Below Hell's Canyon by Grace Jordan, and the Hell's Canyon case study. For the drawings, pictures, and scenic videos, we first went through our grandpa's drawings and pictures, so we were able to incorporate his memory within our guide. While in the canyon, we also took a surplus of pictures and videos of the historical sites we visited. While collecting oral interviews and stories, we had the opportunity to record oral histories shared by the knowledgeable speakers that joined us in the canyon, including Stacia Morfin, Justin Luther, Steve Evans, and Patricia Keith. In addition to the information gathered in the canyon, we worked more closely with Patricia Keith to gather oral interviews from individuals who called Kirkwood Ranch home, since we were unable to visit that site while we were in the canyon. Lastly, we exchanged emails with Ciara Green and Nate Luther to get some more valuable quotes. After collecting all of our data, we merged the various mediums together to create our interactive historical guide. The format of our guide mirrors the format of the literacy sources we use to collect the data. It includes a cover page, dedication page, table of contents, 7 chapters of content, a reference page, and an acknowledgements page. Each one of our 5 chosen historical sites encompasses 2 pages of content each. When looking on the surface, the most predominant medium used is written history. When writing our chapters, we chose to present the information in a way that was not only appealing to the eye, but also in a way that made sense to the mind and left a lasting impression. For Kirkwood and Cache Creek, we split the information by the families who live there because each family has their own story to tell. For the other 3 locations, we presented the information chronologically and split the information by the events that each played a role in the historical story of that place. During this process, we were really able to dive into the historical information of these sites, both the known and the hypothesized, and start to piece together the stories these sites are trying to tell. When choosing the pictures and drawings to include, we wanted to achieve 2 main goals: depict the historical events and depict the beauty of the historical sites. The pictures used to depict the historical events allowed us to reflect on the pictures we created in our minds while reading to the actual physical place. When combining those images with the present day images, we also gain a sense of how that site looked in the past and how it looks now. We can envision the places people lived and the trails they took. The pictures depicting the beauty of the historical sites allows us to really take in all that Hells Canyon has to offer. The scenic videos taken and used plays a huge role in allowing us to be able to visit those sites, at those sites, even though we are no longer physically there. The videos ultimately provide a virtual route into Hells Canyon. The oral interviews and stories are arguably one of the most impactful mediums. Oral histories are able to express pure, true emotional connections to the sites that are often lost in visual and written mediums. The rate of speech, tone of voice, and prosody of the interviewees tug at the heartstrings of those listening. In addition, the oral interviews we received from Patricia Keith provides us with the opportunity to not only put a voice to the name and/or a face, but an inside look into stories not yet published in any books and the values these people held and still hold of Hells Canyon.
Many of you have probably been wondering where the interactive part of our guide comes in and how one can incorporate videos and audio into a printed book. The answer is we used QR codes. Throughout our guide, we embedded numerous QR codes. Some of the QR codes are in video format, marked by the play button icon, while others are in audio format marked by the music note. All the interactors of this guide have to do is scan the QR code either with the QR reader app or a camera on the phone and click the web page notifications that pop up. You are then brought to the contents of the QR code holds. The video QR codes incorporate several types of medium and include a video, a title, and a reference. The audio QR codes includes a picture, a title, the audio clip, and a reference. QR codes, if they can be considered a medium on their own, are where the real power lies. As previously mentioned in the last few slides, throughout the creation of our guide, we gained different attitudes of and values for Hells Canyon, depending on which medium we were working with and the perspectives they offered and portrayed. It wasn't until the creation and incorporation of QR codes that we really developed a deeper understanding of and an emotional connection to Hells Canyon. This was made possible because we were combining all of the mediums together. We were no longer focusing on just one to two mediums at a time. With the audio QR codes, we heard the echoes of the people who called and still call Hells Canyon home. We were exposed to the emotions and the values these people held, and we ourselves felt these emotions and started establishing values. With the video QR codes, we were able to simultaneously connect those emotions and values to the history, images, and videos because the video QR codes included all four mediums. It was truly an amazing experience, this project, and an experience that filled a hole in our hearts that was lost. We reconnected to our childhood selves and the bond to and appreciation for Hells Canyon that our grandpa instilled within us over 10 years ago. We would like to leave you with a few last words. For me, sitting on a rock is the most comfortable thing in the world. Just sitting on a comfortable rock by the river and just listening, more listening than watching. I always feel like I start to hear the stories of the people. And then when you start feeling like you're listening to the land, just really hearing the land and the river. Patricia Keith.
Then I'm still miss it. Even I'm dreaming it. When I go to bed, I'm still dreaming of it. Christmas Creek. I was so happy there. Even I still believing and thinking and dreaming with Snake River. Basque sheep herder Benny.
But to me, the beauty of everything, I think the most important thing was accountability, responsibility. It taught us that so much, and honesty, all the good parts of being a human being, I think. It has meant so much, and I don't think there's a day goes by that I don't think of something that I learned. Violet Shirley.
From mountaintops to riverbeds, the voices of our ancestors radiate. The relatives, plants, animals continue to share knowledge, teachings, and lessons. By spending time with Pus, water, and this living landscape, you are in the depths of an ancient place where knowledge is bountiful, accessible, and comes with responsibility. Once you develop a relationship with our homelands, you are also tasked with honoring the place, processes, and people who are a part of it. Ciara Green.
It is very apparent that these people have deep ties to Hell's Canyon and hold values of Hell's Canyon as if they were still living there, even years after they have left. So let us ask you this: what do you value about Hell's Canyon? If you don't have an answer to that question, we hope this guide helps you develop those values like it did us. If you do have an answer, then we hope you are willing to let us add it to our guide, and that our guide just serves as a reminder to you of the values you already hold and strengthens them.
Thank you for listening to our presentation. Do you have any questions or comments?
Fantastic. So we'll hold questions until the end and do all the questions for these first four presenters then. Our next presenter will be Jerry Ellison, the nutritional and medicinal value of Hell's Canyon plant life.
Can you guys see my screen? Yeah, okay. That's a tough act to follow. That was pretty good. Let me just get this popped up. So I did my, let me slide back. So I did my presentation on edible plants in Hell's Canyon. I chose this project because I'm a kinesiology major and I've always been really interested in nutrition. I also really like survival. You can always catch me watching Survivor, Naked and Afraid, or animal documentaries. I just like it. I don't know why. And I want to teach others about nutrition and the importance of these plants that are in Hell's Canyon. So yeah, let's get right into it. So my objectives here are to educate the audience about nutrition, educate the audience about edible plants in Hell's Canyon, and to show the audience pictures of the plants I will briefly discuss. Before we get into the plants, I want to give you guys a little background on the nutrition. And we're going to start with minerals. So minerals are elements on Earth and they're in foods. Our bodies need minerals to develop and function normally. The minerals that I listed here are the ones I'm going to be talking about. There's a lot more out there, but I'm just going to give you guys the rundown. Okay, so potassium is the first one we're going to talk about. It's a mineral that helps your muscles work. It even helps the muscles in your body that control your heartbeat and breathing. And you can see on the side there, I put down how many milligrams you need a day. For potassium, it's between 3,500 to 4,700. And next we have iron, which is another mineral that our bodies really need. Iron helps us store and use oxygen in our muscles. And as you can see, we only need about 8 to 14 milligrams a day. So it's not very much, honestly. The next one I have here is copper, and copper helps the body form red blood cells. It also helps maintain healthy bones, blood vessels, nerves, and our immune systems. Now, if you look back at my slide, you'll see that we don't need a daily milligram of copper. MgC stands for a millionth of a gram, which is also known as a microgram. Magnesium. So magnesium is responsible for muscle and nerve function. It also helps blood sugar levels and our blood pressure. Iodine, it makes thyroid hormones in our bodies, and these hormones help control our metabolism, bone and brain development. And last but not least, calcium. So calcium builds bones and helps keep them healthy. It also helps our heartbeat and our muscles to contract. And you can see how much we need a day. Let's see here. Hold on a second. Ow. Okay, so now we're on to vitamins. And I hope you guys haven't fallen asleep yet. This is kind of a lot to take in, but just hang in there with me. So now we're going to talk about some vitamins. And the first one I'm going to briefly talk about is vitamin A. We need this for our vision, the immune system, and for reproduction. Just like I think it was iodine I said, we only need let's see here, my bad. Anyways, okay, so let me move on to vitamin B, actually. So vitamin B is a complex vitamin. It's made up of 8 different vitamins, but I'm only going to be talking about 2 of those vitamins here in just a few minutes. Vitamin B has an impact on your energy levels, brain function, and the cell's metabolism. Vitamin B6, on the other hand, helps the body store energy from the proteins and carbs we eat. Vitamin B9 helps the body convert carbs we eat into glucose, which is our brain's preferred food source. Vitamin C helps protect the immune system and is needed to form blood vessels, cartilage, and muscles in the body. It's also an antioxidant, which helps neutralize free radicals in the body. And free radicals are molecules that break down the cells in the body, which is harmful. Finally, I'm going to talk about vitamin E. Vitamin E is another vitamin that is an antioxidant. It also prevents clots and enhances the immune system. I'm having issues with my computer right now. Okay, so macronutrients. I'm not going to get into what macronutrients are, but just know that they're carbs, fats, and protein. I've kind of touched on carbs already, so I'll make this kind of quick. But carbs are the body's main source of energy. It helps fuel the brain, kidneys, heart muscles, and the central nervous system. And most of our calories should come from carbs. About 45 to 65% of our daily intake of calories should be from carbs. Fats are also known as lipids. Fats help absorb vitamins, keep our bodies warm, and protect our organs. And we need about 20 to 35% of our daily intake. Proteins help repair cells, they build muscle, and is a critical part of the body's process that carries oxygen throughout the blood. And I put a little note down here. The average person needs about 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day. And the average person also burns about 1,800 calories a day by doing absolutely nothing. Just by breathing, sitting down, that burns calories. Still having issues. Awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the plants in Hell's Canyon. Since I gave you a little rundown of nutrition, we're going to start with strawberries. And right next to the strawberry name, I put the scientific name for it. I think it's pronounced Fragera vesca. Correct me if I'm wrong. But okay, so strawberries contain about 2 to 9 calories depending on the size of the berry. They're high in vitamin A, C, and E. They're high in potassium, iron, copper, magnesium, and iodine. And 86% of the calories come from carbs. 7% of the calories come from the fats. 7% of the calories come from protein. And I did some research and I saw that strawberries are usually in season from early May to late October. So that's when you want to look for it if you're hungry and you're thinking of me. Blackberries. So blackberries, also known as rubus, contains roughly 2.8 calories. They're a good source of vitamin A, B, C, and E. They have a lot of potassium, magnesium, and calcium. 79% of the calories come from carbs, while 9% come from the fats and 11 come from proteins. And these are usually in season from June to August. They grow best near streams because that's where they get, water from. And you'll have to watch out for blackberries because they have thorns on them. Well, not on the blackberries, but on the plant itself, it has thorns. Next, I have service berries. They're also known as June berries. And 1 cup of service berries contains about 94 calories. They have large amounts of potassium, magnesium, and iron. They have vitamin B6, A, B, and E. And 90% of the calories are from carbs, 5 come from the fat, 5 come from the protein. And they're usually in summer or in season in late spring to early summer. Okay, now we're on to currants, and they're also called ribes. So they're also known as gooseberries. 1 cup contains about 66 calories. They're rich in vitamin C, B6, fiber, copper, and potassium. I don't think I mentioned what fiber does earlier, but it just helps you poop, in case you're wondering. 82% of the calories come from carbs, 11% of the calories comes from the fats, and 7 comes from the proteins. And they're usually in season from May to August. Okay, now we're on to pine nuts. And pine nuts are not actually nuts. They're a seed, and a single pine nut contains 1.1 calories. They have a lot of vitamins and minerals. It includes vitamin A, C, and E, calcium, copper, iron, and magnesium. And they actually have a lot of heart-healthy fats. So that's pretty cool. 7% of the calories come from the carbs, 85% come from the fats, 8% come from proteins. And let's backtrack a second. So we just got done with the berries, and you'll notice that the berries, they're mostly carbs, but for pine nuts, they're mostly fats. And that's just something to kind of take note of, because to me, that's really interesting, because I had no idea that these different types of food sources had that big of a difference in the carbs and fats and proteins. Anyways, pine nuts, they're usually in season from September to late October. And there's many different species of pine in Hell's Canyon, but the 2 most common are the ponderosa and lodgepole pines. Okay, now we're on to onions. So onions contain 29 to 63 calories depending on the size. They're a good source of vitamin C, B, B9, and B6. They also contain water, protein, carbs, sugar, fiber, and potassium. So you can get quite a bit of your nutrients from onions. 90% of the calories are from carbs, 2% come from fats, and 8% come from the proteins. And they're usually in season from late summer to early autumn. Okay, now the arrowleaf balsam root. I didn't find a whole lot of information on this because people don't generally, eat this, but it's an edible plant that not only people eat, but cattle and sheep like to eat this stuff too. I was reading that horses, especially, they love to eat the flowers. So the roots, leaves, and stems are edible, and they can be boiled if you choose to do so. Only the stalk is not edible. They're best in the spring and early summer. They grow in dry areas and open ridges, and they're usually in season from May to July. And now, since I gave you guys a little description of these plants and what they're good for, I'll show you some pictures. So right here we have strawberries. You'll notice that it's like a 3-leafed stem, and they have little flowers on it. We have blackberries. Like I said earlier, there's thorns. And they just kind of grow in clusters. I don't know, it's kind of cool to look at. The leaves are a lot different from strawberries if you notice. I'll go back one. They're completely different. Service berries, the leaves are also different, but the berries, they kind of look like grapes. I've seen photos where the berries are also like a greenish color, but they're probably not ripe when they're that color. Currants, the leaves are different. And then the pine tree. So the left is the ponderosa and the right is the lodgepole. The main difference I see in the two trees is that the ponderosa kind of has stripes, like darker stripes, and the lodgepole is kind of a lighter color. And we can't forget onions. I used to walk onion fields when I was growing up for a job. Never again. And the balsam root. It looks just like a flower because it basically is. But they grow in like clusters together. And like I said, horses love to eat the flower itself. And here's my works cited. I have 2 pages of that. And questions, but I believe we'll answer those later. Thank you guys for watching.
All right, great job, Jerry. Thank you. So next up, we have Bryson Cloward, and he'll be presenting on perspectives and education in Nez Perce stories.
All right, can you see me? Cool. Before I begin, I'm just going to share some links to some PDFs which relates to my project. There should be 3 of those, and those will be in the chat. And all right. Oh. Let me just, there we go. All right. So this here is my presentation on Nimipu storytelling, and specifically about the educational aspects that it provides and the various perspectives that people have of the stories. And to begin, I set out on this project to mostly just because I wanted to learn a lot more about these kinds of stories, and generally because I believe that stories and storytelling are definitely a very powerful tool, and a unique one, and provide a lot of various types of knowledge and are an expression of the cultures that they come from. And I think that it's important that we can learn from them and appreciate them. And so I set out on this project with the goal of finding 3 groups of interviewees. The first one being the most important, the Nespra storytellers that I sought out to ask questions about how they conduct storytelling and how maybe the traditions are kept up and what lessons you think you could learn from them. And it's where the majority of the information on these slides comes from. And then I did a small group of students from this class, the Hell's Canyon Institute, where I just introduced 3 stories that I had chosen from written sources for them to read over, and then I asked them some short questions about that. And then I did the same thing with people who are not in the class, who aren't necessarily going to college, just other people I had access to. And right here is just a summary of what the stories are about, but certainly doesn't capture, what they're actually about. And that's what those links that I shared in the chat will be if you want to read further. But I chose these 3 stories generally because I felt like, especially that first one, A Meeting Between Creator and the Animals, was, well, one of my personal favorites, but also I believe it's a good introduction to those stories. And out of all of them, I chose ones that I thought had a variety of lessons and like themes to see maybe the differences between them. And I learned quite a bit about the differences between written and oral storytelling, and that oral storytelling is definitely a lot more adaptable, which is a thing of importance when especially when it comes to, like, who's telling it or what situation you're in, and especially who's listening to it, because a storyteller may adapt the lesson to what you may need to hear, or based on the amount of time they have, how long they want to go. But the written stories are a good way to preserve stories that may not otherwise be preserved, and to allow access to those that may not even have access to them otherwise. Because even within the Nimipu culture, not everyone has access to these stories or someone to tell these stories. And some of the people I've interviewed, like Vivian Henry, would they describe that some of their first some of their first introduction to these stories was through the written form. And of course, even some of the more seasoned storytellers, such as Alan Pinkham, they don't know everything. And so that is also a good resource for them. And of course, even in the oral storytelling tradition, there's many advantages to just being able to hear it being acted out and the voices done. Not everyone's a good storyteller, and it helps to have those written sources. So the stories were often told in the fall or winter, but that's not exclusive to those times of years. And as I was just explaining before, longer or shorter, and definitely express different aspects through different retellings. And they can be, and at least from what I've observed from the student interviews that I was able to do, is that there's many different lessons, and especially more so when the story is given, because different aspects can be expressed depending on the storyteller's preference. But definitely could be kept up more because both Vivian and Stacia have both said that, it's generally just easier in the modern day to entertain your kids with TV and other things rather than the storytelling. And so to some degree, that tradition is lost. And something I want to know is that when I was talking to Vivian, she said that even though it's good to appreciate what these stories give us, we should try not to interpret it from our own like lens, from our own culture, and we should consider what culture is coming from. And they all generally agree that these stories should be shared, and that it helps bring everyone together. And that's just given for any culture, that if you want to learn more about them, you listen to their stories. And they provide a great deal of traditional knowledge, such as, especially some of you may be familiar with animal identification. That first story, a meeting between creator and the animals, is one example of a story that can change in length depending on just how much time you have and how the storyteller is feeling. And you do that by just adding more animals to describe in that one. And of course, it can help you remember geographical features. Having a story associated with a place definitely lets you remember it much more likely. And especially remembering information that would otherwise be lost, such as the ancestral homelands of the Mimipu, because they're often described in these mythological stories. Also describing, the origins of traditions, the seasons, and something called the mythical truth, which is a term that I've heard from some of the speakers we had in Hell's Canyon, and even Pinkham, who said that it's a way of explaining things that maybe you didn't understand before. And of course, when I introduced these 3 stories to the various participants, I found that overall, the students from Hell's Canyon Institute were a little bit more informed on the background of some of these stories, which does help their understanding a little bit. Just a little bit, not to an extreme degree, because as far as we've learned from the storytellers, that you don't actually need all that much context to understand them. Of course, you need to know, what the animals are, whatever these places are, but I found that the students were a little bit more informed, especially when it came to that first story. But the second one was a little bit more varied, and the third one was definitely a bit confusing for some, because that one did come from a different book source, which was translated from the Nez Perce language, and so there's it worded a little bit confusingly, and so it did help to have some amount of explanation for those who didn't understand it that well. And I especially noticed with that last one, Turtle with Bull Race, is that the people would try to compare it to other stories they know, and obviously with Turtle Bull Race, they compared it to the story of the tortoise and the hare, which is understandable, but as Vivian had told me, is that that does distract you from what the lesson may be a little bit, because I definitely felt like those who made that observation tried to take the lesson from the tortoise and hare story and apply to that one, which is only slightly related, and that's also where a little bit of explanation does help. And of course, there are definitely many lessons and many facets to any given story. And all the stories have a lesson, even if it seems like it's not there. It may have been lost over time, but there is a lesson. And I definitely observed that, the wide variety of lessons that people can take from these stories from all of the student and peer interviews. So I found that most people can recognize the traditional knowledge that is present in the stories, but there is a variety of interpretation among what the values and the lessons may be. And at least when I was spending time in Hell's Canyon, hearing people speak and being in the environment in which these stories would be created, I felt like I just had a deeper understanding of where they're coming from and why some of these stories were created. And that will be everything for me. And of course, I'll leave questions till the end. Stop.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bryson. All right. Well, now I have another Bryson. We have Bryson Netto, and he is talking about transcendentalism in the Hell's Canyon.
You guys hear me all right? No?
Yes.
Cool. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Well, it seems like everything's working so far. Okay. Okay, so I did my project on transcendentalism in Hell's Canyon, which is kind of like a writing style and philosophy that I kind of wanted to apply to the canyon and use to kind of gain more from it in a sense. So, so the reason I did this, I think this quote really sums it up, like why I wanted to do this. This comes from Henry David Thoreau. It says, "I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms." So basically, what this quote means to me and what I take from this is that by having a transcendentalist mindset and thinking in this way, you act in a way in which you take the most out of life and out of experiences and out of things, and you push aside the stuff that detracts from life, that takes away from the greatness that is life. So I wanted to go into the canyon with this mindset and have this kind of view of taking as much information, as much knowledge, as much life as possible by just having this mindset and by having a transcendentalist worldview. So if you probably some of you don't know what transcendentalism is. So what is transcendentalism? So when I talk about transcendentalism, I mean the American transcendentalism that came about in the eastern part of the United States, mainly like Concord, Massachusetts. That's where Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, who are the main influences on this project, which I'll get into later, came from. And there's like different versions of transcendentalism that come from like the East and Europe and stuff like that, which is a little bit different, but they kind of are similar in a way in their view. This picture right here is comes from Walden Pond. It's this plaque that sits there, and it's one of a quote from Walden Pond, which is a famous book, which I'll get into in a minute. So, and then transcendentalism is also it came out of the religion. It came out of Christianity. This idea called Unitarianism, I believe is how it's pronounced, which is the idea that instead of God being like several different people, like Jesus, the Holy Spirit, they were all one being, one entity, and that one entity was all of existence in itself, and that everything was a part of God, and it was divine, and it was everything was just kind of important and should be studied in a sense. And then a lot of these people kind of didn't really vibe with that in a sense. Most of them were like deist, which is the idea that God like created the universe, but he's not involved or anything. He's away doing whatever he does. But there is a spirituality and a divineness that is inherent in the universe just from being created by a God. And so this leads to the kind of worldview that I came into this, is that like everything is divine, and that includes like people, everything that's just in existence in itself is divine and worth knowledge and worth studying and understanding. And by using our brains and reason and stuff like that, we can gain a much greater appreciation and knowledge from everything in the world. And nature is like the best place to do that because it's the most I guess freeing and natural kind of place, and it kind of lets the people run wild with themselves instead of having to rely on other people and things like that. So that's the kind of worldview and mindset I went into the canyon with, was that like everything should be understood and be thought of, and that even if the lessons that were being taught in the canyon weren't like let's say if I was doing a project on water collection or something like that, maybe like the geology part wouldn't be that informative to me. But by having this kind of mindset, I was able to listen to every lesson, to listen to everything, and listen to the world and the Hell's Canyon itself, and gain knowledge no matter what, just because of the nature of this project and this kind of worldview. So here's like the readings I did to kind of understand Transcendentalism. So who's considered to be the founder is Ralph Waldo Emerson, and in his essay Nature, which kind of lays out the ideas of Transcendentalism, and is kind of where a lot of this stuff comes from. He's going to be the guy without the beard down there. And then Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden Pond or Life in the Woods. He's also very influential. He was good friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson. And what he did basically is his friend Emerson let him stay on Walden Pond, and he built this little cabin, and he lived there for two years by himself. And he wanted to, like I said at the very beginning, kind of figure out what life was and like get as much out of life as possible and experience it all. And one of the things that's kind of very important with Thoreau that he came up with by doing this was the idea of civil disobedience. Since like he began to understand the world as being one and unified and everyone being kind of equal, he became with this moral mindset that like slavery was terrible, because this is during the 1830s and 50s, which is when slavery was still a thing and before the Civil War. And so he because the government was going against his morals of what he thought was truly right, he believed that with civil disobedience, we should like civilly act like against the government. We shouldn't be violent or anything like that, but we should not pay our taxes if the government's going to fund a war to go steal land so they can do slavery, which is what happened with the Mexican-American War. Yes, that's the one. And another one, I didn't read a ton of Walt Whitman, but a very important figure in Transcendentalism. He kind of was in this group, and his big like Transcendentalist work would be Leaves of Grass, which if you want to go read that, you could read. He kind of, what he did is he would come back to it over years and years, and it's like super long. It's just a long kind of poem. It's really weird, but it's really good. So what did I do when I was in the canyon? So basically what I did before I went to the canyon, I did research on Transcendentalism by reading these books and reading up on the philosophy and trying to really understand what this worldview was and how to have this mindset when I go into the canyon. Here's a nice picture I took of the canyon when I was there. And so when I was in the canyon, I kept a journal, which is what normally a transcendentalist writers would do, is they would keep journals and they would just write whatever they thought, what kind of ideas came to them. And then when they got done with whatever walk or whatever kind of experience they were doing, they would collect those ideas and put it into more formal and more like poetry or prose that had the point that came from this experience in nature and in having this mindset and stuff. So when I was done, I compiled it all into a book, and then I wrote a reflection explaining like what I took out of this mindset and what doing this kind of helped me understand. So these are the themes that came about in my writing from being in this transcendentalist mindset and being around. So the first one is us and them. This came about because a lot of the stuff we talked about in the canyon was the war, not the wars, but the like fighting and stuff that was going on with the natives having their land taken from them and people being killed and stuff like that, with the idea of the Chinese massacre, these people being killed just because they're Chinese and stealing their gold. And so with this transcendentalist mindset, it didn't really make sense of seeing them as us and them and seeing the world in that way. It became, it just didn't make any sense. So a lot of my writing has this idea of like a oneness and having everyone be one. So then this idea of us and them doesn't make any sense. And I kind of come to this conclusion that when I see these events, I don't see it as we hurt these people in a sense. I see it as we hurt ourselves, and that when we continue to have conflict, and think of ourselves as us and them, we're just simply hurting ourselves. And then another theme I talked about is a love of nature and what it means to love nature. I kind of wanted to understand what that is. And what I came down on with love of nature is this idea that you want to see something grow. You want people to continue to move on and grow, and the world to grow. You want plants and trees to grow. You want different plants and trees to grow. You want everything to continue to grow. And by having this feeling of, I want something to grow, there's a great love of nature that comes with that, and a great feeling that comes with that. And I talk about like how with a tree, you don't want it to just stay the same. You don't want a sapling to be just a sapling. You want it to grow into a mighty tree so that maybe one day it can give you shade and show you love. So that's kind of what I thought about with the love of nature. And then the self, a lot of this came with like the oneness and like being one, and kind of accepting that you are something, and that you are a part of nature, and that you are just yourself. And even when things get hard or tough, or you might feel like you lost yourself, just it's important to remember that you are still yourself, and that yourself is always there, and that by being in nature and by being out in a place like Hell's Canyon where nature is still not like tamed or anything like that, it's a great way to find yourself and become reconnected with the self. So this is kind of the reflection I had at the end, is that it made me really appreciate the canyon and the trip more. I think if I had done a project like water collection or collecting plants or something like that, I wouldn't have had this great like affinity for the canyon as much. I wouldn't have appreciated what I saw and what I learned as much. And by having this mindset, I was able to take a lot out of the canyon and a lot out of the teachers and the learning and things like that. And it reminded me of the like importance of being in nature. It's been a while for me since I went camping or been out. I've been kind of just sitting around here in the dorms and stuff. And so when I went out there, it reminded me why I love to go out into nature, and why it's important to be in these places like Hell's Canyon and understand it. And then these are the books and references I have. And so that's that.
All right. Thank you very much. And at this time, we can open up for questions. So if anyone has any questions here, We can, unmute the mics or put them into chat. And then we can also field questions from YouTube. I'll let Marlo handle that end. I don't know who's tuning in from there, but we might have a few.
I had a question for Bryson.
Awesome.
How do you think that being in Hell's Canyon might have altered your experience as opposed to trying this somewhere else?
I would say that, like, in a sense, it doesn't. In a way, I feel like you could use this transcendentalist mindset anywhere, and I think that's what makes it powerful. But I think Hell's Canyon is just one of the perfect places because it's kind of untamed, and it's the most natural place you could be. And there's a lot of history and a lot of knowledge that comes from the land itself. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily something specifically special about Hell's Canyon, but it is a great place to use transcendentalism and use this kind of mindset.
Okay.
Got a question for Bryson Cloward and Jerry. For
right.
you two, how did being physically present in the field in Hell's Canyon affect your projects?
Well, I was able to get some perspectives from some of the people that were there in the canyon, but I also do feel like it kind of helped me know where they were coming from, because it's very easy to kind of separate yourself from the material when you're just like sitting at your house reading it or something. And I think being there, it sets the atmosphere in a way. It's not a good way to put it, but if you understand what I mean.
So when I was in the canyon, every time I looked at a plant, I'm like, wow, can I eat that? And I don't know, like being in the canyon, I was just myself, I feel like, and I'm really, like I talked about earlier. And I just had all these questions in my head all day long about like what kind of vitamins are in these plants, like what can these plants do for me? And yeah, just being in the canyon made me really think about that more than I would like at home, because I don't have as much selection in the canyon as I do here.
Jerry, could you put together a menu for us from what's available in the canyon? A dinner menu.
Of course, yeah. We can have some rattlesnake.
I don't know about that.
It's the thought that counts.
I had a question for Rebecca and Ray. Did you have to learn new skills to do this interactive field guide, and how did that process go? What were your challenges in putting together all of these media parts for your project?
So I actually took a couple classes in high school. So I took video production in high school and a lot of other tech classes. So I was able to compile the videos and pictures and audio pretty easily. Honestly, the hardest part for me was the written history, because I struggle as a writer and it takes a long time to do it. So that was probably the biggest struggle. The other part was the fun part.
I would have to agree. The written part of everything was really difficult just because we're both not writers. Like, that's not what we really enjoy doing, but just reading all the history is very fascinating. And one thing that kind of helped me with creating our book is I took a yearbook class, So I kind of know layout design type stuff. So that kind of set the mood for the whole book.
Got a question for Bryce and Neto. All of those writings that you did in the canyon, are those compiled in some kind of a format? And do you ever plan on sharing it with others?
Yeah, I plan on making it into a book, but they're not very good. I don't know if you guys would want to read them.
I've read them and I'm going to take a different stance on that.
Yeah, I guess if Marla likes them, I'll probably try and release the book a little bit more, but yeah, I'll have to figure that out.
I would love to have it for future students. I think that would be really cool.
And I have a question from YouTube. Were there moments in the canyon where you were conscious of how you might have been experiencing it in the way any of the transcendental writers you mentioned at the start of your presentation?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the first part of that?
Sure. Were there moments in the canyon where you were conscious of how you might have been experiencing it in the way of any of the transcendental writers you mentioned?
Yeah. Well, in a sense, I kind of understood that it was very different from how they were experiencing it, because Thoreau was in a cabin by himself for 2 years. I was the opposite. I was around people almost constantly. So in a way, I took a little bit difference out of it because I was around people and I was experiencing that. And so there's something, I guess, I kind of understood the difference between what I was doing and what they were doing in a way.
For the button hops, you guys mentioned that this project is ongoing. Where do you see it going in the future?
Well, we hope to add more historical sites in the future, hopefully be able to visit them as well to get the same perspective that we did when we were trying to create the historical sites that we have now. And even like expanding on the histories of the current historical sites, because like I mentioned in our presentation, there's new discoveries that pop up, and it's just, history is an ongoing process. Like, you always get new perspectives and new stories that would be valuable to include into a historical guide like this one. So I think just keep adding historical sites and information onto the historical sites we already have.
I was really impressed by your project. Oh, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
I was just gonna say that there's also, I was talking about the varied histories, the knowns and the unknowns, or the hypothesized. So as more historians go to these sites and they share their research and connect it to like the journals that Steve did, you can start correcting things that may have been wrong before. So that can also be a thing that we do, is make corrections for any errors we might have made.
Do you plan on sharing this with the public? It was so professional and beautiful. It would be a shame if it never saw the light.
Well, we hope to make it a digital copy of some sort. So hopefully eventually it will get out to the public, but at the moment it's not there yet.
If you will, share it with us, we can keep a copy. We can give a copy to the library, and we can share it, in a small circulation, and yeah.
That would be awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there too. Actually, I have have young kids, an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I was thinking even as you were presenting, like this would be super cool for them to look at. So great work. I was really impressed.
Thank you.
So we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions before we take a short break.
I had a question for Bryson Cloward. I wanted to know what your biggest discrepancy was with the story interviewees. So if you had one story and you got the most variety of answers, which story was that and what were the differences?
It's either the second one, Coyote breaks the dam at Salilo, or the third one, Turtle the Bull Raced. We'll speak. I definitely think it might have been that third one, because you would have some people that would say, well, they think the lesson is that, you know, the bull was arrogant and he like gambled too much. And then we've had others that said, you know, it's like a warning, because one of the main points of the story is that Turtle cheated in the game. That's how he won. And so one of the other lessons that some people took from it is that it's a warning against that, saying that people will cheat and that you need to be aware of it. Also saying, but from a different perspective, but like a similar but different perspective on that same one, is that not necessarily a good lesson, but that cheating gets you what you want in a way, which is one way to interpret it. And I think it does depend on whose perspective you're really viewing it from in the story. So if you see Bull as the protagonist, then you'll have a different, you'll get a different takeaway from it than if you see Turtle as the protagonist. I'm trying to think of some other ones that was in there. There was another lesson about the value of cleverness, and in Turtle's plan on how he defeated Bull. And I think that that one had a little bit more variety, and especially what seems to be like contradictory lessons than the other two.
All right, excellent. Well, we had one question come into chat. It seems, you know, a pretty easy answer perhaps, or, you know, a quick answer for the Buttonhoffs. Have you ever thought of collaborating with Hell's Canyon Tours as making your project in a handbook or DVD, etc., so that, you know, people could buy or use on their own, etc.? So what do you think?
Personally, we haven't given much thought to that route of it, but it's a really good idea, and it's similar to some of the publications that our grandpa did. So one of our resources for our guide was the Hell's Canyon Educational Tour book that was revised in 2016. And that is a book that our grandpa made for the 4th grade river trips that he did with Snake River Adventures. So it was like a lower elementary, like educational book. So it was written towards them. But it would be interesting to do one that was more written towards the adults that would go on the Hell's Canyon tours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Really fantastic job, first group. Please stick around, take a short break, you know, get up, walk around, grab something to drink, and then come back here. We will regroup at 10